All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Jamie. And I'm really excited today to talk about fostering student autonomy in the classroom. So today, in this session, I'm really interested in talking about how to create a really robust classroom discussion that's really driven by student intrinsic motivation and contributes to great student learning outcomes overall. So before I get started, I would love to hear a little bit about you all that are joining us today. So if you have a moment, I would love for you to let us know what school and department you're teaching in, a word that might describe how you're feeling for getting ready for the fall, and then for anyone who might be familiar with Packback, how many terms you've used it, and if not, that's totally okay. Any of the tips I'm sharing today can be applied to any discussion board that you're using. So as I move along, I would love to see those chats come in, but otherwise, at any point, please feel free to put any questions in the chat or unmute and interrupt me at any point. That's totally fine as well. Thank you. Bewildered is a great word, Chris. I like that. I like that. All right. So just to introduce myself real quick, my name is Ishani, as Jamie said. I'm currently one of the curriculum consultants over at Packback, so my role really is to help faculty understand how to implement this tool to the best of their ability in a way that really matches their core goals. But today, we're not really talking about Packback too much. We're really talking about the art of discussion, which is something that I'm extremely passionate about, and you'll see why as I go through this presentation. So one of the aspects of online learning, which I know is the big theme of the trainings from this week, is that our classroom has changed a lot. I think that we can all definitely say that there's a certain different approach to online learning than our traditional face-to-face classroom. And so we want to make sure that we are replicating that magic of the in-person classroom discussion in an online format in some way. And throughout this presentation, I really want to demonstrate how giving students autonomy is a way to make that magic happen. So one of the first questions I have for you all, since I know that some folks have probably taught many online classes before and some might be totally new to teaching, what are some of the challenges that you're currently seeing with student engagement and student effort in your classroom? I would love to have folks share out loud if you're comfortable doing so, but chat box responses are totally valid as well. All right. I really love this answer here. Fear and lack of preparation. I think we've definitely been seeing a lot of discourse right now on student confidence, especially since sometimes being in the Zoom room can feel like a panopticon in some way. So I definitely have heard that before. And then lack of preparation, I think, is also a big one. Students are juggling a lot with online learning and with the entire world just kind of being chaotic and in disarray. So making sure that students are able to come to class feeling prepared and ready to participate there. So thank you, I really appreciate that answer. One other challenge is task management. I definitely think, again, going back to students feeling like there's so much on their plate and they're juggling a lot, sometimes not every student is taught the skill of how to manage all of those tasks. So making sure that their assignments are written in a way that they clearly understand the expectations is also really important. So thank you, I appreciate you sharing that answer as well. And then why don't we take one more challenge that folks are seeing, and then we can go along to how I think we can alleviate some of that. I'll wait like 30 seconds more to see if anybody else has anything. Yeah, also a great answer, volume for teachers has grown. Definitely we're seeing enrollment is boomeranging. There's quite a bit of an uptick there. So also, how do we make sure that the discussion is staying robust, even though we might have more students in our classroom as well? I think that can also lead to a little bit of a bystander effect with student engagement as well, where they're like, well, I have so many other peers that somebody else will answer the question, and then maybe nobody steps up there. So thank you for everyone who shared. I think that those are all really important and insightful. Yeah, also great with things not being uniform and not knowing what to expect. I think that goes into the task management and lack of preparation as well. So I definitely think a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing right now with student engagement, student effort are things that it seems like we're seeing across the board as well. So thank you everyone for sharing. I really appreciate that. So one of the things that I've observed is that online discussion typically tends to fall into two extremes. So our classic Blackboard online discussion or whatever LMS you may use is that structured academic, almost like mini essays. So what we can find with this type of conversation sometimes is that students aren't really like talking with one another. Also, if you ask students why the sky is blue, you might get some of that repetition between student posts. And then we also tend to see some dissatisfaction from instructors and students on folks feeling like they're not really engaging with the material and rather just doing it because it has to get done. On the other hand, for online discussion, we sometimes see more of that unstructured social discussion, which is more of that chat without that pedagogical backbone. So this is, I would say, more for instructors that are using like a Google Hangouts or Discord or something in their classroom, which is excellent for homework help questions, course logistics, making sure that everyone's on the same page, but not necessarily super conducive to that open-ended academic discussion that you might want to see students engaging in so that you know that they're really understanding the course material. So one of the quotes that I've really appreciated in my research for this presentation is that growing body of research is showing that one of the biggest barriers to effective online instruction is a challenge in building those effective, engaging online communities. And I think with this, again, there's so many things that students are thinking about. I think the lack of preparation, task management issue where they don't know how to balance their work, so then they don't feel like they can fully participate. There's that fear of trying to put themselves out there. And then there's also that aspect of students also not knowing the instructions clearly, so that way they don't really know how to be effective in that online community environment. And so I'm really excited then to share some of the tips that I have observed working at Packback on how to really build that online community. So one of the theories that I really use as a backbone in the way that I frame online discussion is Garrison's community of inquiry. So Garrison was studying some educational psychology, specifically around online learning and higher education. And what he found was that the educational experience is really built through three different aspects. The social presence, which is making sure that we're really centering exposure to peers, the cognitive presence, which is all about that inquiry formation, and then the teaching presence, which is about metacognition and also student-to-student learning and moderation. So when these three aspects are in alignment, that's when students can really have that engagement and motivation and that higher level of thinking. And with this, there's some very easy ways to implement all of these in your class, making sure that students are talking to one another in the discussion and not just replying to you, making sure that student inquiry is really the center and students are asking their own questions, and then also giving students the opportunity to be the leaders of the conversation, because we are all as much teachers as we are students, and there's always something to learn from everybody. So why do I recommend the community of inquiry model? We found that more interaction from the instructor is not always a good thing. Sometimes students feel like when the instructor is heavily involved in the discussion, they don't necessarily want to write what's from the heart and what they're genuinely interested in, but rather what they think the instructor might like. So finding space to both balance students being able to be free and have that space to interact with one another, but also making sure that you're still there so that way they are achieving those course targets that you're interested in. We also want to make sure that students are asking their own questions, and that's the goal. So the practical inquiry model really outlines the process in the brain that learners go through when they're trying to form open-ended inquiries. And what's cool about this is that with questions, students need to know what they know, but they also need to know what they don't know. And that's an interesting process that is able to have students internalize the material better because they're solidifying what they do know, and they're able to themselves identify gaps in their knowledge. And of course, I don't think anybody would disagree with this. Engaging discussion can lead to overall course improvements across the board. So making sure that students are exposed to highly engaged peers in that online discussion format leads to better grade outcomes overall. And then this effect is also even greater for marginalized students when they start to build those confidence skills in terms of interacting with other students. So a lot of this is really making sure that students feel like they have intrinsic motivation to engage with the material. And that's where we really bring in self-determination theory. So self-determination theory is a psychological theory that came out of the University of Rochester in the 1980s, and it essentially was looking at the science of intrinsic motivation. Why do I want to do this task for the love of the task itself rather than some sort of extrinsic reward? And so they found that for intrinsically motivated learning to occur, these three aspects need to be in alignment. Purpose, or why should I care about this material? This is why I think a lot of instructors will say, like, you need to lead with the why. So making sure that students really understand that the material is important for them to know beyond just an exam or a paper or a quiz. The second aspect is autonomy, which is how much agency does a student feel like they have in their learning environment. And with this one, we want to make sure that students are able to explore topics that they're genuinely interested in and feel like they have the space to explore their curiosity. And the last aspect is mastery, which is how competent do I feel in my learning environment. So this really can occur when students feel like they have space to understand the material and also fail if needed, and that they also understand what feedback they need in order to continuously improve throughout the term. So when these three aspects are in alignment, that's when we really see that engaged and effective learning in the classroom. Which I think ultimately we know that knowledge doesn't come from just memorization, but really connecting those facts that you're learning in the classroom to a larger understanding of society, future academics, a future career, etc., whatever it may be. So we really like to emphasize a student-driven Socratic questioning model that provides students with information from you and then opens up the line of communication to them to really be creative and curious about the material and find the aspect of the class that's really interesting to them to explore. This type of response also will have the content be more committed to long-term memory in the long run. So that's why we really like to emphasize this really student autonomy driven and also inquiry driven model to our discussion. So I know I just talked a lot about theory and kind of the backbone of why we have our methodology be the way it is. But I would love to hear a little bit from you all of what energizes your students to be curious and self-motivated about the material in your class. And again, you're welcome to unmute and interrupt, or you're welcome to put it into the chat box if that's more comfortable for you. We'll pause here for a couple minutes. Additionally, if there are any questions from anyone in the audience, I can take a moment now to answer those as well. All right, great answer from you, Ray. Real life application, math and engineering. I think that really goes back to that purpose and relatedness aspect that we were talking about with self-determination theory, making sure that students they see the math and they don't just think it's numbers and letters, which is certainly how I felt for a long time, but really seeing how much of those math and engineering concepts are reflected in the real world. I think that's a really great reflection. Thank you. All right. Yep. Current real world examples and applications, how the content relates to the real world. These are all really excellent. I love to see that everyone's doing this in their classroom. Yeah, contemporary issues and imagery with art history. I think that's really big as well. Yeah, I love that everybody seems to be relating their course material to the real world. I think that's a great way to make students really understand why this is all important for them to internalize for the long term, making connections to their lives and interests. That's actually really interesting, Jamie, as well. One of the things that we really like to encourage in our discussion model is students bringing in their own personal backgrounds into the way that they approach discussion. I think that students have so much to teach other students, And so finding a way to relate like a different class that they're taking or a book that they're reading or a news article that they saw into the conversation of what's happening within your classroom is a great way for students to feel like they had that teaching presence in that moment, and also making that real life connection as well. So love that as well. Yeah, when your enthusiasm is there, then that helps students as well. So I really love that. I think obviously when you have passion for the material, the students feel that passion as well. And I also really like, it helps to have them share their ovations with their, or motivations with their peers as well. I think that's really important with the social presence aspect I was talking about with Garrison's, is that again, like students really need to have that exposure to other students, because they're going to be excited to learn from folks that they view as peers as well. And yeah, I think that's great. Having them share their goals amongst one another is a really great way for them to just be able to learn and have this community around teaching one another. So thank you, everyone. These are all excellent responses. I'm so glad to hear this. I think it's really exciting to have a group of educators that are so invested in making sure that students understand the purpose of the material. So thank you. I really appreciate that. All right, so I just talked a lot about theory, but as I was saying, we need to make sure that our theories always apply to real life and have that real life application. So here I want to share some more practical tips and best practices for achieving that really effective online discussion. So the first, and I think somebody actually mentioned this earlier, is to set simple and consistent expectations. So complexity, we have found, is a curiosity killer. So what we recommend to have a really authentic and engaged online discussion is to keep your requirements simple enough that they can be remembered without referencing a syllabus. So for example, ask one question per week and respond to 2 peers. We found that when the requirements for a discussion are extremely complex, it can lead to a focus on how to win all the points rather than them bringing their authentic selves into the discussion. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't set some sort of word count limit or require a source, but it does mean really thinking about what is essential for you to feel like a student has put in the work for a good post, and then maybe try and remove everything else so that way students can really bring their full selves into the conversation. The second is that a simple recurring deadline really helps to build a habit. I think we've all heard the common saying of a habit takes 30 days to build. And so we want to make sure that there's consistency so that students start to build that, okay, Friday night is my discussion night. That's when I'm going to go on the discussion board and post my post for the week. A weekly deadline every week does help students build that almost like that muscle memory around asking questions as part of the learning routine, and it helps to remove that confusion and last minute panic posting, which I'm sure is very frustrating across the board. The second is to foster autonomy via a community of inquiry. So with this, the first aspect, as I was saying, was to ensure that students have that social presence in the discussion. So we want to make sure that there's a high level of student-to-student interaction. So for example, on your LMS, you would want to make sure that students do have a requirement for interacting with other students. We also want to make sure that the posts are done in a way where they're public to other students, so students can learn from other students' posts. The second, of course, is that cognitive presence. And so students are able to attain the cognitive presence by discussing their own open-ended questions. So one aspect or one recommendation I like to make is that you as an instructor, rather than asking your own question on the week or releasing some sort of prompt, is rather to set a topic for the week and have students head their prompts with a question themselves. So if your prompt for the week is going to be Freudian psychology, for example, since there's a brain on the screen, the student's question may be, why is Freud considered more or less debunked in the common age? And then they can do their response to that post based on the question that they created. Again, that metacognitive awareness is needed to craft that question. So it's a great way for students to continue internalizing the material deeper. And the last aspect is to ensure that students have that teaching presence in the discussion. So we want students to play that teaching role in the discussion by both contributing their own questions as the discussion prompts, but also encouraging students to almost guide the conversation via, if your platform that you're using has some sort of like upvoting or downvoting aspect, moderation, whatever it may be, or even simply that they have the ability to choose which post they're able to reply to. So that way you can see really where the student interest is falling and maybe even be able to use that to tailor your course the next week. And the last aspect, and I think sometimes the most challenging as I've observed, is staying focused on what really matters. So one of the sayings we like to use here internally is that online discussion is a game of chess, not checkers. So sometimes there might be an incorrect answer shared. Sometimes there might be some silly questions asked by students. But that really engaging learning environment means that you need to leave space for students to have autonomy. And that means that you have to let go of a little bit of autonomy yourself and a little bit of that control. So I always like to say, as I was saying, have a very simple expectation for student discussion, give them room to explore the topic that you're suggesting, and then take it in whichever direction they'd like. But if issues do arise, employ that more systems level thinking. So instead of going and correcting individual students, maybe look for patterns. You're noticing a lot of students are referencing a chemical incorrectly. Then address that through some sort of course-wide announcement, some sort of more general conversation. And of course, you can always talk to individual students as well. And then also, I think, as I was saying earlier, the discussion can be really a source of insight. When you let students have the autonomy to really be their true selves within the conversation, you can see where students as a whole are genuinely interested. You can see where misunderstandings are authentically because several students are quoting something incorrectly or interpreting something incorrectly. And then again, you can use that to then be responsive as an instructor and shape your classroom to match or to continue improving the student outcomes based on what you're seeing in the conversation. So as I know this was a bit short, but I know it's the end of the day, so I'm sure folks would be excited to get that little snack or coffee break afterwards. But as we're wrapping up here, I would be interested to hear what tips you feel like you have to achieve a successful online discussion in your classroom. So for those of you who have been teaching online for a while, I would love to see what other advice you have as a in addition to what I've presented here. And again, unmuting is good, putting it into the chat is good, whatever is most comfortable for you. Awesome. So we've got a suggestion to make sure that they talk to one another. I think that's really big, again, to that social presence aspect. So definitely, I think a key aspect to prioritize in your discussion. Asking those open-ended questions to encourage thoughts. I think that's great, getting them started thinking. And then, of course, asking them for their questions as well, I think is excellent. Yes. Having that schedule or rotation of when discussions should be posted, making sure that students really clearly understand the expectations around deadlines is great. Asking students to share their experiences, as I was saying earlier, making sure that students are understanding the purpose and bringing their whole selves to the discussion and sharing with their peers about their own life story and life knowledge as well is great too. Thank you. These are all excellent. All right. So as the tips continue rolling in, and please oh yes, pet pictures. That's huge. Really, really big tip. Definitely 2 thumbs up for sharing pet pictures in the discussion. Wow, yes. Definitely best tip of the day. Much better than anything I shared in my presentation. Pet pictures. That's how you really get a good engaging discussion going. Love that. Yeah, we just love a good cat or dog moment in the middle of the classroom. Thank you. So As we're wrapping up here, and yes, please continue sharing tips. We can definitely use the chat box as a nice wealth of knowledge there. Um, I just wanted to quickly talk about Packback itself. So as I was saying earlier, any of the tips that I shared can definitely be implemented into the discussion board that comes or that you're using right now or comes with your LMS. But our platform specifically is designed to support this style of discussion, that inquiry-driven online discussion. And then our little special sauce is that we're backed by an AI to help students develop critical thinking and communication skills. So our digital TA, which is what we call our AI, auto-moderates the platform discussion for aspects such as insufficient length or closed-endedness. We coach students on effective writing, that we also amplify the instructor feedback through smart sorting, recommended posts, etc. So for those of you within the SUNY system, there are a couple ways to access Packback if you would be interested. If you are teaching a SUNY Online signature class, you're covered. SUNY Online does have an agreement with us, so that would be $0 for you or your students. You can contact me. My email is right there. But if you're not teaching SUNY Online, you either can choose to have a student paid model or go for a more department or campus funded model as well, depending on budget. And for that, you can contact my colleague, Kim. Her email is over there. So if you would be interested in hearing more, definitely reach out to us. Or if you have any additional questions about the presentation today as well. But yeah, I wanted to spend some time hearing about any questions from the group or any additional comments or tips that anybody has based on their experience.
Hi, this is Jamie. I just wanted to mention that a number of faculty have used Packback in the last couple of years within the SUNY system, and the people who have been very vocal about it really enjoyed Packback as kind of like a tool to use to increase the academic rigor of their discussions. And I'm not necessarily trying to plug Packback, but I am trying to convey that faculty are using it and finding it very successful at increasing the students' kind of participation, the level of what it is they're communicating within the discussion forums using Packback, and a number of them have really fine-tuned how they use Packback to help students compete with themselves to maybe produce a slightly better discussion than they did last week by hitting these markers. So it's really neat, and we will be doing, I'm sure, more presentations with Packback in which they will actually demonstrate the product for us to see, but it's pretty incredible, I will say.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And yes, we have had some very, very vocal proponents throughout the SUNY system who I think someone mentioned, yes, the augmenting the ability to offer feedback. That's one of the great things with our platform is that we'll take care of some of those like more baseline feedback of increase your word count, do a little bit more open-ended questionnaires, and all of those things. So you can focus on cheering students on when they're really hitting the content the way that you want. So I think that's definitely a big observation that we've seen. All right, so we've got a question. Any tips for getting students to understand post-by and discussion close-by dates? Excellent question. So I would say with making sure that students are truly understanding the deadlines, first off, I think if you make a table, that's a great way to start. I always found, at least when I was in college, that was really helpful to know, to have like a table where it says, this is when this week's discussion opens, this is when it closes, this is the topic for the week. Additionally, I think it's helpful to have a consistent time where the discussion for 1 week closes and then the next discussion opens like right away. So that way, students aren't necessarily trying to juggle like, oh, well, the discussion opens Sunday morning at 12:01 and closes Friday at 11:59, and then they have to remember 2 different times, but rather that, oh, well, the discussion for 1 week closes on Sunday at midnight and then opens for the next week at Sunday at midnight as well. I have found that trying to keep those dates like as close to each other as possible can be helpful as well. Yeah, also a great suggestion from Jamie here of using potentially software remind. All right. Well, I can hang around for a couple more minutes if there are any more questions, but for those who might be interested in getting that post-training snack break, thank you so much for attending, and I appreciate all of the great engagement today.
Well, thanks to you, Ashani and Kim, for joining us today. And I'm going to stop the recording now.